Right, joining us now for more on the Africa Climate Summit discussion in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, is Kitka Goyol, the UNICEF Regional Head on Water, Climate and Environment. Mr. Goyol, good evening and thank you very much for your time and coming on tonight here on In Focus. Let's begin firstly, maybe broadly, by talking about what is climate action financing and what it entails.
Thank you very much for having me. Climate action financing actually means funding that goes towards alleviating the impacts of climate change on vulnerable communities and households. Now, we have seen that this is essential if we want to build our human capital in Africa, because we have been impacted by the impacts of climate change proportionately compared to those that have influenced the frequency and scope of actions that are related due to climate.
And why is it, though, so difficult for countries to align their investment priorities with climate change mitigation and adaptation goals?
Exactly. This is one of the things that UNICEF has continuously advocated for, and said that when you look at the impacts that climate change is having on our communities, it is one that is going to affect our future. It is one that is affecting and the young people that are the majority of the population in Africa today. So if we want the future to be secured for this population, for this group of our society, then we must put our money where the needs are. Why are we saying that children are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change? Because physically they are unable to cope with those shocks when they happen. Because also their physiological makeup is such that their bodies cannot be able to withstand the toxins and the pollution that is going around. So if we put our investments in these areas, we are going to help them absorb the shock of these events, but also secure their future in the medium to longer term.
So is the summit in Nairobi a gathering as opposed to map out a way on how to get, developed economies to put their money where their mouth is? Because, for example, it's easy to say to countries in Africa adopt policies that are climate friendly, right? Those kind of adaptations require money. If the investment is not going to be made to assist those countries, they are not likely going to follow through on, for example, the Paris climate agreements.
That's very true. But the Nairobi gathering is one that is the first of its kind in Africa. And we see it as a great opportunity to bring our leaders together, to plan, as you rightly said, but not just to plan, but to take action on those plans. Equally, what we are calling for is that these issues of climate crisis is one that calls for the global community to come together. It is not just for African countries to do by themselves or for the global north to do by itself. It calls for joint efforts. And as you rightly said, it's not about the funding that is coming from overseas. We should also look at our internal resources. How are we using them? Are we targeting the most vulnerable with our resources? Are we doing really efficient use of those resources? If we answer these questions and we have the political will of our leaders, their commitment to take action on these issues, we are very hopeful that we are beginning in the right direction and we will see the change.
But developing countries want assurance. So how will they get assurance that, for example, wealthy countries will not turn their attention to other things when they are now supposed to be delivering on climate finance for developing countries? But also, more than that, the developing countries would say, we are the ones who are probably experiencing the severe damage to climate from activities that do not emanate from us, that actually emanate from wealthier countries?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have always said it, that we in Africa, unfortunately, are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate, but we contribute the least to the drivers of these impacts that we're seeing. However, what we're saying is that this is something that is affecting the global system, and it's not just only in Africa, or it's only in the global north. It calls for joint efforts. Yes, maybe more of the issues that are causing the impacts that we see today is coming from industrialization that happened ages ago, and it is more in the global north. We need to have resources coming from that end to support whatever efforts we are doing here, because as we know, even the basic necessities of life, we are still struggling with those. We don't have the basics in terms of access to water and sanitation, access to good healthcare systems, access to education, access to social protection systems. So if we are able to have these and they meet the minimum requirements, we are sure that whenever these shocks happen, our communities will be able to bounce back. But now the situation is such that before we bounce back from one shock, another happens. And this takes us further backwards. So we need more efforts, joint efforts from all directions, international, local, domestic, and we take local actions to be able to help us cope with these issues.
Right. So there will be new targets, I assume, that will be coming out of this summit, and how will you be able to ensure that those ambitious new global renewable energy goals or targets are being met?
Now, it is about the commitments, as you rightly said, from Paris to all the different COPs. Pledges were made. The challenge is, how much have those pledges been redeemed? Very little. Why is that so? This is the question we need to ask those that made those pledges. And therefore, to ask that we need to, agree to or take action on the pledges we made, meet them, and then when we meet those, our commitments, we can then hold those we have given that task to account and say, look, those resources we provided, how have you used them? But if we are not able to meet our pledges, then how can we, with any sincerity, ask others to be accountable for certain actions? Again, the message is, let's all put our efforts together. Let's all, as a global community, take action. And whatever little action we are able to do in our little corners, it goes a long way. We are not looking for individual heroes, but we are looking for joint heroes on this issue of climate change.
That's the UNICEF Regional Head on Water, Climate and Environment there. That's Kitka Goyol. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you coming on tonight.